So what kind of role does India's private sector have, not just in India's growth story, but also in enhancing its strategic interests? To talk about all of this, we have with us a foreign policy expert and author, Harsh Pant. Thank you, Mr. Pant, for your time, for speaking to NDTV. You have argued in the favor of a unified and diversified private sector push for strategic goals. This comes at a time when one of India's infra major Adani Group has been targeted in what many describe as wanton allegations. Can you tell us why do you think it's important to have that kind of approach towards the private sector?
See, in all, Vasudha, in all major powers that you look at who are global powers, who are economic powers, and then strategic players around the world, governments and capital have a very important relationship to play, and to work with each other. We have seen how the state has, in other countries, in major powers, in major players, have leveraged capital, have leveraged the private sector to their strategic advantage. Unfortunately, what we see in India is that cohesiveness is not there. Whatever has happened in the last few years, where we have seen, the government using its key, private sector capabilities and have brought them to bear on the global stage to a limited extent. And that, I think, has been a problem, because we cannot have, unless there is a whole of government approach in terms of meeting India's strategic requirements, India would not be able to emerge as a strategic player. And therefore, when you see what has happened with this in this particular case, we see one particular group that has been targeted. It has been targeted because it has tried to do something in partnership with the government to further India's strategic goals. And that makes it perhaps, the target in this case, but it also tells us a vulnerability that India faces at this very critical juncture in its global evolution, which is that it tends to have only a few of these conglomerates who can have an impact at the global level. And I think that's the problem.
There's a lot of expectations around India to emerge as the connector between the East and the West. We saw that happen during G20 as well. Major connectivity projects are on the anvil. Why does it become important for the Indian government to incentivize the private sector to build more for its own strategic goals?
See, absolutely. What is now happening is that India is being looked at as a credible player. For a long time, India was not seen as a credible player. India would say a lot of things on the global stage, but they wouldn't matter because there was a credibility problem that India has faced. I think what we have done very well in the last decade in particular is to position itself at the very heart of global conversations. And that means India as a bridge, India as a connector, and in particular in the context of the wider contestation around connectivity and infrastructure that is happening around the world. India is now at the very center. When you talk of the Indo-Pacific, for example, you cannot visualize a connected Indo-Pacific without India sitting at the very heart of that conversation. And I think India as a bridge between East and West and North and South is now gaining prominence, and countries, particularly those countries that are looking for alternatives, are looking at India, are looking at how India will partner with other countries, how India will bring to bear its own capital on this. And I think in some ways, India's role in this connectivity and infrastructure game is going to become very, very critical. And therefore, at this particular point, if you don't have the capacity, if you don't have that ambition to bring to bear your private sector, it will not work. And India, for example, has tried very hard, and yet we have not seen that kind of private sector participation in this endeavor that perhaps would launch India into this major global landscape. And that is a problem. And I think, therefore, private sector needs to be incentivized, and private sector also needs to take some risks here, because this is a game of great global significance. This is a game of strategic significance, and this is a relationship that India is now building with large parts of the world, where without private sector's participation, we will not see India emerge at the heart of these changes. So I think not only Indian government has to incentivize, but also from the other side, private sector will have to look at this as a major area where they can intervene, where they can participate, and perhaps also in major ways benefit, because if things go right, there are huge advantages here which can be reaped.
Well, Adani Group is also one of India's primary private sector companies that actively supports Government of India's connectivity ambitions in countries like in different continents, in different countries, and also in various Indo-Pacific areas. And this is happening at large. How can the private sector help in reinforcing our stated foreign policy goals, such as, say, Neighborhood First or even the Act East policy?
See, we all, all of these policies, where are these Act East, Neighborhood First, Sagar, etc., they rely on a whole of India approach. This is not simply now a matter that Indian government can come in and declare a policy and say that, look, we are willing to respond. Indian government, Indian state can only do so much. We see it, for example, in the domestic context. Indian state, can envision, can try to do a lot, but ultimately it's a question of that the capacity problem kicks in. Indian state does not really have that kind of capacity, which perhaps a country like China can leverage, because everything there is in some ways state owned and state led. But here, because you have a very vibrant private sector, a private sector that has allowed India now to become a global economic game changer, that needs to be leveraged when we talk of Neighborhood First, when you talk of Act East, when you talk of Sagar, policies, because without private sector's participation, there will be a vacuum. Indian government, Indian state will only be able to fill a very limited amount of this void, and always there will be disappointment from the other side. That you'll always hear countries saying that, look, India over promises and under delivers, and part of the problem is that Indian state has a limited capacity, and so unless private sector is there, it won't be able to manage and mobilize government's responses. Of course, it is all very well to say that, look, there is only one company that is available, but ultimately there is also a question of how many private sector entities are willing to participate in this enterprise, and therefore what Adani Group was doing will have to be done by many other private sector enterprises. And here you would have to give Adani some credit that they have been able to be part of this wider Indian engagement around the world and become a part of this approach towards the India trying to achieve its strategic ambitions. But it's only one actor. You cannot there cannot be one actor that can deliver all the goods, because it's impossible. And at the end of the day, the demand is so high and India's role is growing so fast, then you need multiplicity of these actors working in cohesion with each other to deliver on the strategic ambitions that perhaps India has.
Also, Mr. Pant, how does then tarnishing of India's private sector, such as what we are seeing right now or what we recently saw, how does that stifle achievements of India's strategic goals? Would you also say that this kind of targeting also has an element or a possibility of transborder supremacy or some professional vested interests?
I think that cannot be denied, and that I think one has to take all of this into cognizance when one is looking at India's engagement in the world and India's private sector's engagement around the world as it acquires greater confidence, as with some support from government, it also perhaps is allowing India to achieve its strategic ambitions. So I think that kind of targeting, to be honest, one should expect more of that to happen as India grows, as Indian private sector grows in confidence. I think we will have to be prepared for that, because that is inevitably part of the game now. And whether it is other states targeting, whether it is other private sector entities around the world targeting, that is likely to happen, because at the end of the day, we are in a very cutthroat competition, and states and various entities are now looking at this, particularly in terms of capacity building, and particularly in terms of how the connectivity and infrastructure mapping of the world is transforming the way we engage with each other. That is going to be at the heart of these contestations, and we should be prepared for it. And I think that is why the more capability we have, the more entities we have engaged in this sector, the more engagement we have between government and the private sector, the more private sector ambitions to take risks in this sector grows. That would give us resilience. That would give India resilience resilience in this sector. So I think one of the big lessons of this entire saga that has emerged in the last week or so is that there is a resilience problem that India is facing, and it cannot be solved. It won't be solved with one actor playing a major role. It can only be solved if not only the private sector comes together and looks at this as a major feat, as a major opportunity for itself, but also Indian government, Indian state working more in concert with the private sector and incentivizing private sector to do more in this.
Thank you, Mr. Pant, for speaking to NDTV.